So we're here with Congressional candidate Liam O'Meara. Why don't you go ahead and tell us a little bit about yourself?
Right, so I am Dr. Liam O'Meara. I am a professor of Middle East and European history. I teach at a few area universities, and I'm now a congressional candidate in the 42nd District.
Perfect. We saw him a little bit on the air drums right there. We're talking a little bit before we started about the kind of instruments that Liam plays.
Yeah, none very well. I did play in a little bit of a garage band in years after high school. I played a bit of bass. I played some bass and drums, a few other things very badly. I was never really much of a musician. I don't think I have a lot of natural talent for it, but didn't stop me taking lessons or trying to pick things up. My mother put me through piano lessons, which was torture. But you know, I tried. I'm more of a music fan. You know,
yeah.
The joke was always I'm more the musicologist than the musician. I've got like literally hundreds of thousands of records.
Oh wow!
So I collect music from all over the world. So I know music. I don't play well at all.
Do you have favorite genres?
Yeah, but I do listen to a very broad range of stuff. I listen to rather a lot of metal and different metal genres. I'm particularly into things like symphonic metal, folk metal, you know, the more interesting sort of fusion stuff. But I still listen to a lot of like, you know, death and black metal, things like that, you know, progressive power. But I like a lot of folk music. I particularly love a lot of North African and Middle East folk music. I listen to some forms of jazz, particularly like, you know, big band and then sort of like some experimental jazz. I love North African jazz. I listen to some hip hop, but I have to say I know almost no American hip hop. It's mostly like Francophone or Arab hip hop. Yeah, it's quite variable. There's a lot of like electronic artists I really like too. You know, so I have to say I really have a thing for psychedelic trance.
Oh wow!
But yeah.
Yeah, super wide variety. Did you get into?
I grew up like really into classic rock, so there's just a bazillion bands there that I know super well. I mean, my father was super into like, you know, Pink Floyd, Beatles, that kind of stuff. So that's just in my DNA.
Did you get into all these different genres because you were studying different cultures, histories, or vice versa?
I think the music, I'm just sort of open to music and to sound. That's something that probably comes out of my youth. Early on, I had an odd time processing some sounds. It sounded odd to me. I had a hard time like separating out the different things, and I had to learn in working through that personally, I learned to really appreciate different sound and then to appreciate music in general. So it's one of the reasons I'm actually quite fond of like ambient music now, because where background sounds as a very small child used to bother me, now I really kind of enjoy them. And I can find music pretty much everywhere. And since I can find music anywhere in the world and appreciate sound in general, it leaves me open to appreciating music. So I'll show up anything. I mean, I get a little Sufi drum concert in Egypt, and I'm just like totally, I've never heard anything like this. This is great. It just sucks you in. Like anything can, you know, appeal to me. The way it connects to my research interests would be, well, one thing I frequently study is globalization and its impacts and the movement of ideas, because my technical, you know, my technical profession, I guess my field, I'm a historian of ideas. You know, I'm what's called an intellectual historian. So I study cultures and ideas as they change over time. And something in the way that ideas can move around musically fascinates me on the personal level, but it's also a great way to demonstrate certain concepts to people. So if I can say, okay, so hip hop emerged in the US like when? You know, late 70s, early 80s had like a significant political component to it. You know, we had both East and West Coast. There were responses to like police brutality and racism and whatnot, and they had a very sharp message. And then it quickly became just commercialized schlock, you know, how can I sell Adidas and whatnot. But it had a reason for existing in the first place. That kind of punk ethos of it, that sense of like, you know, pushing back against something is still powerfully influential around the world. And people pick up the hip hop form, they combine it with some kind of local melody or variation, some kind of local instrument or tune, you know, so you get something from like the Arab maqams, you know, these different like flows, and we'll add into it, and then you get lyrics that reflect their concerns. And that ability to take a form from something else and then combine it with your culture and your interests fascinates me. I mean, there's a fun kind of like very generic sort of what professionally would be a very obvious example, but still it probably isn't well known. Is there's a blues group out of Mali in West Africa called Tinariwen, And what they do is they play electric guitars, and there is a kind of American blues influence in what they're doing. And the objections some people might make is, well, they're playing a foreign instrument and da-da-da, these different influences from outside, so they're destroying traditional music. But what they're actually doing is they're taking their traditional melodies and traditional lyrics and concerns, they're translating them to a new instrument, and they're, in that sense, preserving them and passing them on to a new generation who would never otherwise hear that because they would just tune into the radio and listen to whatever rock is being played. So that kind of hybridity, that sense of taking something from something else but also making it very much your own and blending in your cultural concerns, it both fascinates me personally and I use it a lot professionally teaching things.
Oh wow, that's super interesting.
So, in regards to your policy, what are you going to run on specifically for the 42nd District?
That's sort of a big question because if you're putting an academic into politics, you're by definition getting something of a policy wonk. So there are a lot of concerns I have, and it's the list of policies that go up on the website is going to continue to expand over time because as I have time to write down a different position or a different question comes up and someone's interested, oh yeah, sure, I've already got a thought on that and I'll put it out. There's like 3 or 4 already that are waiting in queue to do that. The main thing though that I'm going to focus on a lot, because while I have a range of interests, there are certain concerns that will repeatedly come up. And the key one for me is the economy. One of the things that frequently infuriates me about Democratic politicians is that they won't talk about the economy, that they just cede that ground and they're not able to engage in any substantive way on it. You know, they would tend to prefer not to focus more on social issues and whatnot. And I want to walk right into the Chamber of Commerce and say, my policies will make you richer. My policies are better for the economy than the incumbents are.
Okay. And you're running against Ken Calvert.
Mm-hmm.
What are your specific policies that you disagree on with him and agree on, if there's any?
I'm not sure if we have any real areas of agreement, other than, I guess, us theoretically loving your country and wanting to serve it. I mean, we can be charitable and say he actually cares. I'm honestly not sure he does. I certainly don't think he cares much about the district because he never shows up to anything out here, does not do events. His idea of campaigning is to slap his name everywhere and then just sit on a pile of cash and laugh. So, yeah, but we'll be charitable and say he also wants to serve his country, and I'll say we agree on that. In policy terms, I don't really see any connections there. One key thing that separates me from him is also a central theme of the campaign, and one that I think has a lot of bipartisan support. The idea of clean elections to get responsive politics. You are never going to get people who are going to care about what voters say as long as the politician is just taking tons of money from corporations and special interests. If they're taking their money in from PACs, that's who they work for. The incumbent works for land developers. That's what he cares about. And everything else is just a bit of pandering. You know, an issue comes out, he throws in together some sort of nonsense collection of talking points recycled from the internet, and that's his official statement, and that's about it. He doesn't actually have substantive positions on a lot of things. And oftentimes where he does, he's wildly wrong in empirical terms, right? I mean, his support for Trump's tax cut infuriates me. His positions on immigration infuriate me. They make no actual sense in the data. They're simply pandering to people's biases. They're pandering to confirmation bias.
So in regards just to a specific PAC, I know you want to talk about clean elections, so you want to get money out of elections.
I do, yeah.
Do you feel the same way about unions giving money to the Democrats as well?
In terms of like, if there's limitations on it, and there already are, if unions worked with some kind of super PAC in order to dramatically exceed what they can donate, then yeah, I would oppose that. I think that any individual group of people, any individual collection of citizens should be able to unite around an issue. So, you know, if a nature advocacy group gets together, or an abortion advocacy group gets together, or a union gets together, because that's what a union is. A union is a collection of people, right, rallied around a particular issue. If those groups want to donate some money, they should be able to, but there should be sharp limits on it, which there already are. I mean, unions can donate like $5,000 in the primary, $5,000 in the general. That's it. You know, so it's not like you're dumping 50 million into something. As long as there are sharp limits on what anything can do, I don't have a problem with that. It's super PACs that infuriate me, and it's specifically the commercial interests. I mean, I mean, I'm gonna say this a lot, but I tend to think of politicians as like NASCAR drivers. They should be wearing jackets that show who owns them, because it's not us, right? If we are powering most elections through our direct donations and through donations to groups that represent a collective interest, and again, with all limitations, because again, individuals can donate what, 27 or 2,800? I think it's slightly going up every time. I think it might be still 2,700,
Yeah.
but like 2,700 and then five grand for a group, and that should be it. It shouldn't go beyond that. I don't care how rich you are, that $2,700, that's your vote. I mean, this whole idea that money is speech is inherently anti-free speech, because it says that people who have more money have more speech and more rights.
Right, as in ads and stuff like
Yeah,
that.
to me that's a load of crap. Anybody who has tons of cash can basically buy an election. And we started trying to pass laws about that. People used to walk onto the floor of the House of Representatives in the 19th century with envelopes full of cash and buy votes. People used to stand outside in the streets, Democrat and Republican alike. The Democrats used to have a terrible record of doing this, but they would basically like pick out drunks, hand them cash, and take them to a voting booth. 19th century elections were deeply corrupt. We passed anti-bribery laws to stop that. And then across the 20th century, we have steadily unraveled all of those and found workarounds to make our elections today as corrupt as they were in the 19th century. And to me, that bothers me, and it has to change, because it's inherently undemocratic.
Right, especially in the 2016 election cycle alone, Ken Calvert received a little bit over $30,000 from gun lobbyists, which, especially running against someone like you who maybe doesn't have $30,000 worth of gun lobby money, that goes a long way in terms of advertising and marketing himself. Like you were saying with him posting his name everywhere, if you were to ask like random people around here how they know of Ken Calvert, it's probably from all the signs.
They've seen an orange sign with his name on it. That's basically it. Yeah. I mean, most people have no idea where he stands on issues. I mean, maybe they might know he's the Republican, but I mean, and oftentimes people know him on the issues itself. I mean, I've talked to a lot of Republicans who genuinely dislike him and have serious disagreements with him on issues. Most people just know him by his name. And actually, some might know him still by the company that sells his name, because he still has his finger in the whole development thing, which bothers me, given I see conflicts of interest there, whatever.
Right.
But yeah, okay, so 30 grand from anybody, as far as I'm concerned, that should be illegal. If a gun advocacy group wants to give him 5 grand, that's fine. That's free speech, because any group should have that right to do so, right? So that puts it on the same level as a union contribution. Anything beyond that, to me, then that has to change.
Right.
So one of my biggest issues with Ken Calvert is, you're right, he never shows up to a town hall meeting, never. Why do you think that is?
Well, I think part of it is he's a coward and doesn't really know the issues. He would have difficulty debating some people. There are people he would, hold his own well enough with. It depends on who he's talking to. But I think there's literally zero chance in hell he would ever talk to me. So part of it is just an unwillingness to engage on the issues, right? Because he knows it would not go well for him. He's not a great speaker, and he doesn't know his stuff. The bigger issue, though, I think just gets back to a kind of laziness. He has money, and his office has actually said, I mean, we have actually recordings from representatives of his office saying, Mr. Calvert has won enough elections, feels like he has won enough elections that he does not need to talk to anyone who does not agree with him. And that's wrong. My perspective on this is, I expect people to disagree with me on some issues. No one's going to agree with me on everything. I fully expect that people are going to disagree with me on issues, but I want them to know I'm always going to talk to them. I will always engage. I'll go anywhere and talk to people, and they'll know at least that I'm going to be responsive and listen, right? And we'll talk about the issues. I can explain my position on it. The fact that he does not want to do that at all, I think really is just because he doesn't feel he has to. He can, without doing anything at all, he can raise $1 million per cycle, just because of the number of developers and PACs that already support him. He will have a bunch of corporations and wealthy donors dump some cash into his account, he'll spend some money on advertising, and then just sit on his ass somewhere. That's not campaigning.
And me and you agree. I do not like Ken Calvert, and I am more of a conservative. Me and you have harder arguments, disagreements, and I actually do want to see either another Republican or someone unseat him, for sure. He just never shows up. He doesn't talk to the people, and you're right, you're willing to talk. You came on this show, thank you.
Yeah, I would rather have someone of integrity that I disagree with. in a position of responsibility than someone that I agree with, but who never does any of the work. Right? I mean, it's not just a name or a party label that matters to me. Character matters in politics, as it should matter in everything. I mean, we judge everybody else by their character and how they work with us. A political campaign is essentially a job interview.
Right.
And you put your best foot forward, you say, this is who I am, do you like this? And you have to be willing to do that every time, and to be willing to talk to everyone. If you're only talking to people who already agree with you, why are you even in politics? What's the point? This actually bothers me a lot about the party I'm running with too. A lot of Democrats simply won't go where they know people who disagree with them. They won't talk to people who disagree with them. Like, well, those are a waste of time. It doesn't matter. They don't want to listen. I'm like, why? I mean, we have to be willing to engage if you're going to ever change minds or you're going to ever advance anything as a society, because the simple fact is we all live together and we're all in this country. And many people who genuinely love their country do have disagreements on serious issues, right? So since we all at least have that starting point, we're all Americans, let's figure out how we can talk to each other.
So this past election, he won by 7 points.
Yeah.
And then the Trump election, he won by 12 points. As far as that district goes, that voted for Trump.
Mm-hmm. It has a lot to do with the turnout in the general. Trump actually won the 42nd by 12 points, which gave a significant boost to down ticket people.
Yeah.
If you're drawn out by something, you'll often like check the next down for the party, whether you know the candidate or not. That's kind of common. You saw that in 2008 when Bill Hedrick came the closest to unseating Calvert in 2008. Obama had a significant bump nationally. He was quite popular overall, and Hedrick came within 2 points of unseating the incumbent there because of that wave. So whoever's at the top of the ticket does have an impact. There's no way around that. It can affect turnout.
So what are you doing differently than the last person that tried to unseat him? Are you taking the more Hendricks route or a hybrid of your version of that?
Well, there's definitely more similarities in my approach to Hendricks than to the last person who ran. That would be Julia Peacock.
Yeah.
There's definitely more similarities there. On policy terms, though, there's not a huge amount of daylight between the three of us. I think a bigger issue really is the aesthetic and I mean the way you approach the campaign. The way you want to approach the people. I am not only willing to talk to everyone, which the last candidate said that she would do as well, but I try to do it being respectful. So that you don't put people on the defensive. This is one of the things that runs into me, that bugs me a lot about not only politicians in general, but oftentimes people, is if we get into an argument with somebody we disagree with, right? The first instinct is to push back and say, well, you're wrong, you're stupid, that's just wrong. Well, how can you believe something that's stupid? And as soon as you say something like that, you're putting someone on the defensive. You're basically challenging who they are. Right? Because none of us want to think that we got something wrong. It's difficult to do. And if you put someone on the defensive, they'll dig their heels in and then they no longer hear you at all. It's no longer a conversation. At that point, it becomes just a shouting match. I mean, you've heard that, what's the key expression? No one ever wins a Facebook argument. Right? Because as soon as you're going back and forth with somebody, like everyone just digs into positions. That's that. That's not a conversation. Those can be fun. Believe me, I spent a lot of time in like different groups over the years, and I've been having internet arguments since before the web existed. I was on the internet pretty early on. I've always been like engaging people on this. It's fun, but it's not actually reasonable political discourse. It's not an attempt to really discuss the issues with people. To do that, you have to be respectful and you have to be willing to go everywhere. And another key difference with the last race and this one, something that gets a little closer to Hendricks, is the kind of issues that I'll focus on. I want to spend a lot more time on kitchen table issues, on things that actually affect people. Bill back then talked a lot about the war, and the war had gotten pretty damned unpopular. It's dragging on year after year. Why are we doing this? We're spending trillions of dollars on this. So he focused on that because it did have, some bipartisan appeal. There were independents who opposed it heavily. My issues are more economic, and where it comes up in tons of other issues, tons of other areas that will come up in the campaign, I tend to take a more economic emphasis on them. So on healthcare, I will talk more about how this will actually save you money and increase your freedom. right? Rather than talking about the moral arguments about it, which is much more common when people message healthcare. We need to cover everybody, that kind of stuff. Because, I mean, if you're talking to Democrats, most of them are already going to agree, yes, we should cover everyone.
Right.
And a lot of independents and Republicans do not care. It's not their thing. It's why should they have to be responsible for that at all? What's the point, right? So why approach it that way at all? If instead I can say that this approach to healthcare will save you a tremendous amount of your money and put more of your cash back in your wallet, that will make more sense to somebody. So I'm advancing the same kind of position, but I'm willing to engage with them in slightly different ways. And I can do that because I've actually studied the policies, I've studied how they're implemented, I've studied how they would work in the US as well as how they work in other countries. And I can make substantive arguments on that basis.
I can attest that you are very respectful, and we have gone on a little bit disagreements on Facebook, back and forth, but as far as the 7-point, 12-point difference of how Ken Calvert won and then Trump won, will you target that 5% at all of the difference?
Absolutely, yeah. Now there's two things we want to do in the campaign in order to change the numbers here, because realistically, demographically, both the 42nd and the 8th Congressional District are purple, they're not red, right? The 50th Southwest is still red, but these two are actually purple, but electorally, they continue to be red, right? And I think there's two main problems with that. One is extremely low youth engagement and turnout, right? Now, this also affects some minority communities as well. So obviously we want to try and increase turnout in a number of minority communities, but the bigger issue is really the youth voters. I mean, millennials don't vote, and now you've got what do we call them, the Zoomers, Gen Z, whatever. Yeah, the next biggest one along here. They're coming out here, and they can vote now too. And together, they are massive. I mean, the millennials alone are the single largest voting bloc in the country, and they vote around 20%, right? So people who are retired are still deciding most elections, and they have a smaller stake in it. Right. So the key is to actually give younger voters something they can believe in and something that actually speaks to them. So one of the key things about me deciding to run, right, and me thinking that I might have a shot at this is this sense of authenticity and integrity I can bring to it. I'm going to be myself. I'm not going to hire some focus group to tell me what to say and how to approach things. I'm going to be exactly who I am. I'm going to run on my positions. I'm going to talk to everybody that I can and see if I can excite people enough that maybe politics can be a little different. Maybe it can be more responsive. Maybe somebody actually gives a damn about my positions and what's important to me. So turning out a higher proportion of the disaffected voters and the youth voters is a key issue. I mean, voter turnout on good elections is still somewhere around 62%. I mean, it's not horrible, but it's not good, right? There's a lot of eligible voters who just stay at home and play video games instead. And the other one is, you asked about the independents and the moderate conservatives and whatnot. Am I going to go for that slice there? Absolutely. And here's one of the key arguments that I make, and I try to bring this up wherever I can to Democratic voters as well. Because there's a tendency to lump all Trump voters together. Let's be very honest about this, there are a lot of deeply racist Trump voters. There are definitely white nationalists in his coalition. There are definitely people wearing MAGA hats who are horrible human beings, right? But a lot of people who voted for Trump did so because Trump ran as a populist. He ran saying, I understand the pain of the working class. I know your jobs are leaving. I know you're scared, and I'm going to offer you something different. I'm an outsider. I'm not like these other people. I understand the system and I can fix it. And people heard that message, and some of them believed it. And those are people that I can reach as well. To my mind, the answer to a right populist is a left populist, somebody who's still willing to talk to the people about issues that matter to the working class and to ordinary people. Right? So absolutely, I mean, one of the things that stands out to me, if you look back at, there was a big study done in 2017 that estimated that about 12% of Bernie's primary voters went for Trump in the general. That 12% is prime territory, for us to appeal to if we've got a candidate with a similar level of integrity, because that was one of the things that attracted people to Sanders, and B, also populist policies.
So why do you think those people voted for Bernie? Do you think it was more of a anti-establishment?
There is a significant chunk of that at this point, yeah, and some of that is just, it gets back to the way a lot of people really are disaffected. They don't see the system as representing them. They think the entire thing is just a corrupt load of crap. And yeah, there are a lot of people who are perfectly happy to just, throw a spanner in the works and just break the machine down with whatever they can do. Because, I mean, the simple fact is, a lot of the policy details are difficult for anybody to get into. They're looking a lot more at the candidate and how the candidate speaks and how the kind of issues the candidate talks about and whether they trust this person, and that outsider ethos is important. The fact that I am a lifelong outsider in any number of ways does put me into that same natural category, and it's one of the reasons I said, well, I should do this, because I've been for years trying to convince my students that they should get involved in politics, that they should care. Right? I'm always like, I don't care what your positions are, but you should care and you should want to vote and you should want to do something to help, because we all have some kind of civic responsibility there. And I just came to think that given that authenticity matters so much more to millennials, maybe I should actually throw my hat in myself and say, maybe people could, tolerate a person in politics.
Yeah.
Why not? So yeah, I figured I have to do this because, again, the 2016 and 2018 elections, they were still years of the outsider. They were years for unconventional candidates, people trying to do something different. That doesn't mean everyone's voting for Vermin Supreme, like real farcical candidates. I mean, serious candidates who are just a little different than what people are used to. Now, they're not sculpted into the perfect little, model of a politician. I think that matters.
Right, and so kind of going back to what you're saying about just the millennial population being huge and not having voter turnout, and then you talked a little bit about your students. And being a college professor, I'm not sure if you're familiar with Rate My Professor, but I checked that out on Chapman. You got a 4.7, so it looks like too you're pretty popular with your students who are around millennial age, Gen Z age. And do you think you'll be able to get maybe millennials more interested in voting, more interested in politics?
I'm hoping so, yeah. I mean, the evaluations that I do every semester in each class are always really good too. I mean, people do think I apparently am not bad at what I'm doing,
right.
But I think part of that is that it's not just that, I know this or that, because some of it is going to be like, yeah, they'll be like, okay, because I can bounce off of any questions and run with things, but that's not really it. I think what helps me most in my profession is that I try to be approachable and relatable. I'm not standing up there, my little podium, doing my thing and droning on and on. I mean, my lectures they're full of memes. They're full of terrible jokes. I'll make little references to pop culture. I'll try to find ways to take anything out of the past and relate it to something that people understand now, something in their own concerns. And I try to be engaging. If I can have fun in the class, if I can get them, paying attention and laughing a bit about something, right? That I think helps. Because the whole thing for me is, if you're looking at a class in history, let's face it, most people taking classes in history are not going to become historians. It's not their thing. They're not going to, this is all so interesting. I assume the students are going to forget about 80% of what I'm talking about. It's not all going to stick. If they can do two things in the course of the class, I'm happy. One is I try to develop critical thinking skills. So I use a lot of assignments that are trying to help people to read between the lines to find bias, sort of like analyzing documents well, like thinking carefully for themselves so they can make their own decisions on things, because that'll help you in any number of things in life. And the other is just to inspire a bit of curiosity in people, a sense of wonder, because to me that's how I approach every day. I have a sense of wonder at the universe. I'm fascinated by people and life. And if you can inspire a little bit of that in people, make them it's kind of actually cool to care about stuff. It can be infectious, right? And that's something I hope for at times as well.
Yeah, I did see on the Rate My Professor too, I did see people talking about the memes that you put in your classroom. They like that.
Yeah, I mean, I don't see why. I mean, I don't see why the subject shouldn't be at least have a little fun with it too.
Right.
I mean, I I understand why a lot of people hate history classes. If it's just a bunch of like names and dates and blah blah blah, King such and such a year did blah blah blah. I'm like, who cares? You know, I'd much rather talk about the significance of events. So, what did it cause? What happened? You know, how does it relate to this other event? You know, you help people to like follow these chains of causal reaction and see how things ended up the way they are. All right, it's a little bit more abstract thinking that I'm trying to impart. If I can teach a bit of abstract and critical thinking in the course of the class, by the way I approach things, and if I can use a bit of the humor to keep people engaged and interested in the process, then they're actually learning a useful skill, you know, kind of along the way, you know, like they're staying engaged and interested, you know, rather than falling asleep in the class, and they're hopefully picking up on how you can learn to make these connections. And then even if they're not interested in that particular set of material, they might be able to deploy that skill somewhere else in life.
So as far as the 42nd district, do you know of anyone else that is running in the Democratic Party?
There is one other Democrat running, yeah.
And is it usually a large group of Democrats running, or just a small group?
No, it's usually pretty small. There was only one other person in the last one as well. I mean, there's usually a couple in the primary. I mean, sometimes three. Sometimes they've not found anybody or had like one person running. So it varies from year to year.
Is it too early to tell right now, or is it
Too early to tell.
as who's running it? Could there be another person that puts a hat in?
No, it's way too late to enter this race here. I mean, the party endorsements are already being worked on now, and they're going to be decided in about a month. So, and generally, whoever ends up with the nominations of either party, they're the ones who tend to do well. In order to get around that, you have to have a massive ground game and a lot of money. If you have tons of cash pouring in and you can put an army of people on the streets and build up the name recognition, you can still win a primary without being the actual supported candidate.
Right.
That's realistically not how it works out here, because even endorsed candidates will struggle to raise money in the 42nd. That's how that always works. It's one of the things we're trying to do. I mean, it's having to build up a bit organically over time, but one of the things we're trying to do a little differently with the campaign here is to raise its national profile. Because if you're only looking for donors around California, people in it, you know, trying to attract people to the state party or whatever here, it's a limited pool. And a lot of people just look at the numbers and say, yeah, it's just not worth it to us.
Right.
But if you can inspire people and try to draw in small donor fundraising across the country, that can really help. So I've done a number of media appearances already that show up nationally, and there's new ones being scheduled all the time. And every time that happens, there's a wave of small donors that come from that. If we can try to get attention that way, if we can try to tell people, look, this race could be won. You know, what it needs is enough money to pay for a large enough ground game. That's literally it. If we had even a fraction of what they dumped into the 50th district in the last election, the 42nd could be won. So it's a matter of like just bringing that message directly to people and trying to win that argument with them, because yeah, the big players are they're not interested in committing to races like this.
How do you distinct whether to talk about national issues and specific issues in the 42nd district?
That's always a tough one. One thing to keep in mind is that the job of Congress is to deal with national and international issues. They don't actually represent local interests. That's what your assembly member is for, your city councils, you know, your county supervisors, things like that. There's tons of other layers of government that deal with that. That said, the person in the seat there can interact with those people. They can help to raise federal cash to deal with a local issue. So if something has to be done locally, they can try and get the Congress itself to act and throw more cash into it. But that's often really it. What I try to do though, to at least make it real for someone, is I'll ask them what their concerns are, what bothers them in their life, you know, what's your chief concern here, and then I'll discuss a policy that can directly affect that problem, that can help with it. So you can make national politics local by showing how these policies do affect people on a local level.
And my biggest issue in this district is the freeways. They're always packed at all times of the day, from and back home. So I know that's not really your job and things, but can you get grants for issues like that?
You can, but there's two ways to approach this. One is to keep trying to throw money into widening the freeways, which is just going to make it easier for commuters, which means it's going to encourage more bedroom communities out here because, let's face it, the property is still cheaper here than it is in LA and Orange County, right? So people will keep moving out here and it's a waste of time. Every time you widen the freeway, it puts more cars on it, right? A very significant chunk of the population out here commutes. I mean, what is it, like 30%, something like that? Yeah, there's a 30 there somewhere. But it's a really big chunk of the workforce that has to drive out of district. I think it's somewhere around 30%, but I'm not trying to remember.
Around 38%.
But yeah, there's a big chunk of people who have to hit those routes. I'm one of them. I have to drive 30,000 miles a year because I live in Riverside County and I teach in Orange, LA, and San Diego counties, right? I can sympathize with the pain of being on our roads, but the solution isn't just widening them. That's a short-term thing. It's basically a Band-Aid. We have to keep doing that, but it's only a Band-Aid. The solution is to build the local economy. And that's something you're never going to get with the incumbent. His interest is in the land development, which means real estate, building up more houses, selling more houses. That's what's literally causing the problem. I mean, what he does is why the freeways are as bad as they are. What you need is people who are going to increase educational opportunities out here. Why do we have 0 universities in the 42nd? We have one community college at the far north end, and we have a satellite campus at the southern end here, and we might get another satellite campus coming in here. That's not good. I mean, it's okay, so there's a few community college opportunities. We need more trade schools, we need better community colleges, we need real universities. If we have a more educated workforce, because the overall workforce out here, the education levels are not good, that keeps a lot of industries from investing in the area here, right? So they're not going to put those kind of jobs in this area. We're going to keep getting crap like warehousing, right? And warehousing jobs, while they do provide a few jobs in the short term, all of those jobs are going to go to robots. Every one of them is going to a robot. So building up, logistics and the service industry and all that kind of stuff out here and talk about that like it's job growth. I remember being in a city council meeting for Lake Elsinore and the mayor was just like bragging, look at all these jobs we're bringing to Lake Elsinore. We opened up a Popeyes. I'm like, okay, so Popeyes chicken, that's great. So we have a few more minimum wage jobs for a while until robots will replace that. That's just great. Far less than half of the people in the Inland Empire make a living wage. That's unsustainable, right? A lot of people are forced to work multiple jobs already. The number of people working full time is pathetically low. We have to improve the local economy. If there are more job opportunities out here, if there's a better workforce and more jobs pouring into the area here, people won't have to commute. If there was a university in the area, I'd teach out here. Right? I mean, a lot of the people who move out here, they move to these nice little bedroom communities, they get a nice pretty house, they can buy their little McMansion, and it's cheaper than it would be in Orange County, so that's great, and they just put up with the commute, and they go into there where the job is. You see, so it's, the solutions here are the problem. We have to be able to deal with the short term, but focus on the long term. And in everything that I'm going to discuss in the campaign, I'm always going to try and tell people we have to spend some time on the long term, which a lot of politicians, in my experience, don't do. They would prefer to pander to a short-term issue and pretend that there are no painful issues that we have to deal with. No one wants to talk about the stuff that the real big problems keep causing it. We just want to run around and exploit whatever the issue of the day is, and they get reelected.
Right. And one of your biggest issues is automation. So for those people that don't really know what's the threat, explain that to them of automation.
By a conservative estimate, at least 47% of American jobs are going to disappear in the next few decades. That's half the workforce, and that could be lowballing it. Right? Automation has always threatened jobs. This is not new. This is something people complained about in the 18th century. Every time you improve the workflow in some way and take away a job, someone lost it, right? But what we keep managing to do is retrain people for new jobs. It's reached a point in the last couple of decades here where there simply aren't enough. There's tons of jobs still being put in different service industries and driving logistics and whatnot here that we know are all going to disappear. They're short-term jobs because they're filling an immediate need. But there's tons of other jobs in white collar areas that are literally bullshit jobs. I mean, it's estimated that people spend like about a third of their day being productive. A lot of your work hours, someone puts in 8 hours a day in the office, they're spending time on Facebook and chatting at the water cooler and hanging out in the break room, and they're not actually doing a great deal to advance productivity. And as AI improves, a lot of those jobs will disappear too. So it's not, people often talk about automation, they're thinking, oh yeah, so robots building cars, yeah, that's coming, right? They're not thinking white collar jobs are going to disappear in vast numbers. I mean, I actually have a friend working in AI research for one of these big corporations. I mean, this is something that's coming in a lot of areas. We've been, in the short term, continuing to provide jobs even when they aren't necessary. And that's largely because we never really adapted as a society to the direction we're going. We weren't able to have those conversations. The more you automate things, at some point you have to start thinking about how you can tax the robots and the workflow itself, right? And then support the people out of that. I kind of like the borrow an analogy that I read once about. Did you ever see the cartoon The Jetsons?
Yeah.
It was on syndication for a long time, it's from the 60s, but I mean, I still saw it when I was a kid. I mean, it was just always on. But, George Jetson would complain that he had to work for 2 hours.
Yeah.
Oh God, it's such a long day, I worked for 2 hours, And then they had a little robot maid going around, and, that's really where we should be going.
Yeah.
Realistically, with the level of productivity, because you can track productivity rises across the 20th century, which means every hour we invest, our time in, is worth more, right? Look at the productivity gains and then compare that to the income gains. Incomes have been flat for 40 years, productivity has been skyrocketing, all that cash has just been pocketed by a tiny elite. That money should have been trickling down to us to lower the number of hours we work, which would get rid of a lot of the bullshit jobs. People could be working, 30-hour weeks somewhere and have more time with their family. Right? And then in the long run, a lot of the other kinds of jobs, we should be retraining people. So this goal, this is one of the areas that I kind of laughed at in Trump's rhetoric, the whole saving coal jobs. Why? Why would you want to save a coal job? I mean, the US initially was a world leader in solar cell and battery technology, and we abandoned that to China. They're now kicking our butts in it. There's tons of countries that have been pushing ahead with research in tons of these other areas, and we are holding on to 200-year-old technologies. It makes no sense to me to try and protect those jobs. Instead, you spend the money that you would spend on subsidies for fossil fuels, spend that money retraining workers in fields that are actually competitive. We could still have a trade surplus. Trump right now is trying to deal with the trade issues with tariffs and whatnot, and he's basically blaming China for its success. And he blames the Germans for their success. Germany literally exports more than we do. They sell more crap than we do. We have 7 times their economy. Why? It's because they retrain people for fields in which they can still be competitive. And we prefer inefficiency. I think America can do better. And I would rather that we invest the money to do that, to build a 21st century economy, right? And address the threat of automation by not pretending it's I guess, a threat in the negative sense. I mean, I'm not obviously going to argue for some kind of Luddite solution, smash the machines, get the jobs back, because that's kind of what Trump is doing, right? By trying to preserve coal, he's let's smash the machines. By blaming China for something, he's basically thinking like a dinosaur. We need to start thinking about how we can get to a better economic structure overall that takes care of people and gives us the actual benefits of living in a country this rich.
So that was a lot. Let me take
Sorry, you get me talking and I'll just ramble. So,
as far as energy goes, what is your preferred energy source?
Well, I don't say that I have a single preferred energy source. The goal here is to get us off of things that are literally harmful to people. Even if you want to ignore the climate threat from a lot of these things, and I don't think that we should, you can still say, the air is cleaner when we're not burning oil and coal, which it is. Why do you want to breathe that crap? Same thing like cars. I mean, if the cars were all electric and the solar and the power was being produced from renewables too, then you wouldn't have smog in LA. We wouldn't be breathing garbage and passing on asthma. So even if you want to ignore all the other climate issues there, using renewables just makes sense. And in terms of the price points, I mean, wind and solar are already competitive. I mean, the only thing that really kicks their ass consistently is natural gas. And it's just a matter of time before they exceed that. We keep improving the cells themselves, we keep improving the battery storage techniques there, but it's not a single one. Solar, wind, geothermal, undersea turbines, to use like the currents. There's tons of ways that you can do it. And the key to using all of it is, instead of continuing to patch our antiquated grid, to replace the energy grid with a smart grid that can move things from place to place. So think about the Southwest, right? We've got tons of desert spaces out here that are not well populated. You pack that stuff full of renewable generation, and you pack that with storage capacity. And then with a smart grid and the ability to move the power quickly, it's somehow cold and rainy in some part of the country, the power shoots to them and they're okay. Listening to people like Trump say, what happens when the wind doesn't blow? You just can't watch TV. I'm like, well, are you kidding? I mean, it's just literally stupid. I mean, that's not how it works now. You already use batteries. That's not how any renewable works. But if you get onto a smart grid, it could deal with power in the entire country. And we could move to where all of it is produced by renewables, distributed easily around the country there. The air would be cleaner for us, so that there'd be fewer health problems. We'd all spend less time in the emergency room. Fewer kids would have asthma. To me, it's a win-win. And one of the things I like to point to when you're talking about issues like this is, why do we all have these smartphones around? Why are computers everywhere? Because we invested in the space race, right? The amount of computing power needed to do some of the things during the Cold War led to investment. That investment was done jointly by the federal government, a whole bunch of public universities, and the corporate sector. They all worked together and they all benefited from it. And that has had tremendous economic benefits in terms of our productivity, our way of life. It's made things easier. I can now keep track of friends in Japan and Finland. You can talk to people anywhere in the world. All of that is because we actually said, let's do this, let's invest in this. Investing in the technologies to give us that smart grid and renewable energy would have tremendous impacts in employment and quality of life for everybody else.
As far as the CO2 emissions, I know that there's been a slight drop in CO2 emissions for the last 10 years.
In the US, yeah.
Largely to do about fracking. And so it's 50% less cleaner than coal. So I noticed that you didn't bring up nuclear.
I did not, because largely I think that it's not as competitive economically, because while its cost to run once it's in place is pretty low, the cost to build them is so high in the first place. And it's also, again, it's an antiquated technology. And you end up having to store the spent fuel rods for tens of thousands of years because they're literally harmful. So to me, while it's better by far than burning coal and oil, it still doesn't get us to where, we're thinking of a cleaner world that's healthier for us. Why expose people to radiation or the threats of radiation leaks? I mean, no matter how perfect you think a storage facility is, it's going to have a problem at some point, and that's going to hurt people. Why do it then? If we ever manage to really crack the nut of fusion, I mean, the Germans have been dumping tons of money into nuclear fusion. If we can get that to work, then by gods, we should go for that. But nuclear fission doesn't make a great deal of sense to me in both economic and practical terms. It's, again, better than, but why bother?
Yeah. Okay, so as far as we're going into the realm of climate change now, how would you propose that we get China back on board with cutting their CO2 emissions? Because even with the Paris Climate Agreement, they're still going at a 45-degree angle.
Mm-hmm. Well, the simple problem with a lot of that is with the economic growth, they still need to produce generating capacity, so they're still rolling out crap to do that. But they are also building solar facilities at a faster rate than anywhere else in the world. So if you want to speed them up on that, get back to helping with the research and improve those things. If we were contributing actively to improving the storage technologies for that, the efficiency of the cells and whatnot, it would make it much more efficient. India is having to constantly open up new coal plants because the population is large, it's still industrializing rapidly. If you made solar and wind cheaper than coal, why wouldn't they do that? They know there are health problems. I mean, New Delhi it's just a cesspool of smog everywhere. It's a health hazard. It's listed as a massive hazard just being there. Beijing is the same thing, right? They know this is bad for them, but it's the only thing they can afford. So if you really want to improve that, and this is to me where I think that the best thing we can do in a lot of cases is to get policymakers and business to work together. If it's all policymakers dictating things, you have something like a Soviet bureaucracy, command economies. I think command economies are wildly inefficient. But if you leave everything to corporations, they're going to chase short-term profits and screw the world. They don't care. You need to work somehow together. And there are places where we can actually help with that. If you're dumping money into research and development, as we used to do a lot in this country, R&D numbers have been falling for a long time. If we dump money into that, into improving those technologies, then market forces would actually help with the changes in China and in India. They would be able to move off of that much more effectively. So you're basically exploiting the market itself to improve things. You mentioned that CO2 emissions are falling in the US. That's largely a result of regulatory changes around the world because a lot of corporations are multinational. They have to be able to compete in different places. Regulations are stricter there. Therefore, they have to innovate and produce things that are better for us. So if they keep doing that, we benefit and the reductions go down. So again, it's a matter of like getting regulation to work with those basic market forces.
Do you really, okay, so there's a lot of people that don't really believe in climate change, and there's lukewarmers, which is people that, I agree that there's climate change, but we don't know how much. So do you think it's an existential threat, climate change?
Well, yeah, that's, things like that, I mean, that's just empirical. I mean, people can have whatever belief they want, and I don't really want to engage in those kind of arguments with people. I think that it is what it is already. If somebody wants to approach it that way, it's difficult to try and get them away from that, so I'd rather try and give them other reasons to help us support those same basic policies, right? Which is why, again, I like to focus on the economic aspects of the Green New Deal. Because to me, it's a dogmatic issue. It falls in the same basic psychology as like a religious concern. And there are a lot of things that show up that way socially too. It affects the way many people perceive the abortion issue. It affects the way people perceive the idea of evolution. I mean, evolution by natural selection is empirical, but people have issues with it, so it is what it is, right? I don't see the point of having those arguments.
There's an issue along with the Democratic Party right now that I don't really see great solutions. They're mostly targeting transportation and agriculture. Agriculture is responsible for 9% of all CO2 emissions. Transportation is responsible for 18%. So I see no real solutions. What would be your solution?
Well, a lot of things, some of this comes back to the same kind of, I'll give you a sort of parallel analogy here. Remember all the recycle campaigns? Reduce, reuse, recycle, recycle bins go up everywhere here. Sure, recycling is actually a good thing, right? But the campaign to do it, to get us to take responsibility for it, was bullshit. It was a redirection to get us to focus on our actions as opposed to the actions of the corporations that produce these things in the first place, right? They were choosing to use wasteful materials that were going to cause problems, and they tried to put the onus on us to deal with the consequences of that. A lot of people legislatively do exactly the same thing. Talking more about transport and agriculture are attempts to shift the onus onto people when corporations are doing most of this polluting. You've got tons of power generations, shipping, there's tons of areas that contribute a great deal more to this. So I would like to shift the emphasis there. yes, we should do things to improve different areas. Yes, we can improve tons of things in transport, but that's already happening. Honestly, market forces will give us cleaner transport. There's no way around that. The only way to slow that down is to do dumb things like, I don't know, Trump was pushing to reduce fuel efficiency standards. Why wouldn't you want them to be as high as possible? If you set them higher, then the companies have to innovate more, and that improves the technologies both for the internal combustion engines. It also improves the marketability then for hybrids and electrics. That will all happen on its own, and we're already headed in that direction. In time, the pollution levels from transport are going to keep falling. We need to focus on the real polluters, and we need to start putting something to be honest on that. There are solid, okay, so you come from a more conservative background here, right? There are solid right-wing arguments for what's called a carbon tax, right? The Economist, the British newspaper, their center-right publication, they're free marketeers, they're like hardcore free marketeers, and they have been arguing for a carbon tax for ages. And the reason for that is it tells people immediately that there's a particular market value to what they're doing. It sets a consequence to what they're doing. That affects then corporate decisions. In so many areas, if you just put the right incentives in place, and this is where, again, policymakers and companies should work together. If you set the right expectations for people, right, the right incentives out there, then the market does the rest. I try to make this point a lot of times, just a quick parallel here, and we'll come back to this topic if you want, but wages are a good one. I mean, people often wonder why are wages so low and why are wages so high for the richest people in the country here. Well, the problem is that you lowered the taxes on top earners, so it changed the incentive. If you get to decide how much people get paid, and suddenly the tax rate on high compensation packages is low, you're going to give yourself more cash. If the tax rate on high incomes is really high, there's no reason to give yourself that package in the first place. It's a waste of money because it just goes to Uncle Sam. So you don't do it. You give yourself a $5 or $10 million compensation package, and then there's more cash to pay the rest of your workers. It's a matter of setting the incentives in the right place. By simply removing that one thing, it caused a massive amount of other problems. We're not putting the incentives in the right place to affect these major producers to change their behavior. Why are we producing these in the first place? It's one thing that I'm holding, it's no visual, I'm holding a plastic water bottle, I'm just listening to this thing, but little plastic drinking bottles, right? Why produce these things? Why do we have these at all? Yes, okay, so now I have to remember to throw this in a recycle bin somewhere, right? But why do they make them? They're a tremendous waste of petroleum, they're wasteful to produce. There are better ways to do this already. So if we make it more expensive to produce this, then we encourage investment in the alternatives. And there are other alternatives already for that are less harmful. So it just puts the incentives in the right place for the market to do it.
I know Elizabeth Warren was arguing for a carbon tax. Are you afraid that it might fall on the consumer as well?
They're not supposed to, no, because that's not really how that works. I mean, it's about the energy generation in the first place. This is one of the problems I have with a lot of tax schemes in this country. There's a lot of things that are done really badly that hurt ordinary people and not the people they're supposed to. They recently in California had increased the cost for like overuse of water, right? So they wanted to discourage people from using water to hose down their driveway. I totally get that. My grandfather used to do that. I was like, why are you wasting so much water? It's ridiculous, right? I get trying to encourage people not to do that, but they completely exempted the agriculture industry. In the Central Valley, out in the desert, that's pumping in tons of water. We're taking tons of money from the Colorado River and from Northern California and using it out there. And they can waste as much as they want because they're cut out from it. They're the ones who use more of it, so they should be paying more of it than us. We need to actually go after the right people. So anything like that, I mean, if you're talking about taxes at all, and I know tax is a dirty word, right? But I would like to reduce the burden on ordinary people and increase what they take home. I would like to actually put the taxes on the people who are actually doing the damage in the first place.
Okay, so let's sway towards wages. You went into it a little bit. You say that wages have been stagnant for about 40 years, which they have. The money has, the data doesn't lie. So what do you say to those people that say that wages haven't increased, but the compensation has increased?
Has it? then why is debt skyrocketing in this country? Why is our quality of life falling? Why do we now rank 17th in the world for living standards? We're the richest country in the history of the world. Why do so many countries live better than we do? Right? Why do we work more hours? Why do we have fewer vacation days? There's only one other country in the world that does not provide paid maternity leave, Papua New Guinea. They're kind of poor. If sub-Saharan African countries and Latin American countries and poor South Asian countries can afford to do this, and the richest country in the world can't, that directly affects what people take home. It affects their lifetime earning potential. It hurts you in tons of ways. It increases the amount of debt you're paying. If it costs you tens of thousands of dollars to have a baby, then it hurts the poor more. The rich can afford that, but it hurts the poor, right? Everything that keeps piling on debt. It's not just that wages have fallen. The cost of living is going up. The levels of debt are going up. We have tons of medical bankruptcies. You have people drowning in student loan debt. And all of that matters. Every bit of that matters. The student loan debt issue has come up a few times here, right? Sanders is for forgiving student loan debt. Warren wants to forgive a little bit of it. Most people are like skating around the issue. To me, that shouldn't come across as a moral issue like we got to take care of these students. Because I get why somebody might say, well, I didn't go to college. Why should I pay for somebody else to get out of their college debt? The reason you should want to do that is that it directly affects you. The person who has $200,000 in student loan debt, he's not buying a house, he's not buying a new car, he's not remodeling his kitchen, hiring a carpenter for that, he's having fewer kids or putting off having kids or getting married. It directly affects his purchases because he has that debt and that repayment. That slows the economy for everybody. So look at the rise in consumer debt, right? And then compare that to countries that actually have better pay. Right? We simply do not take in enough. And another key issue there too is, again, look at the productivity. If our hours are actually making somebody richer, if we are producing a lot of value with our time, we should be being paid what our hours are worth. We're having to fight right now to get a $15 minimum wage. That's great. We absolutely should fight to get at least 15, that's fine. Realistically, it honestly ought to be like 25 or 30 if you just look at the productivity levels. In the long run, I'd like to see us reorganize the tax code such that it changes a lot of the incentives, it changes the way we approach these things. In the long run, we might not even need a minimum wage because many countries actually have very high wages without it. I mean, places like Denmark don't have a minimum wage. They show up in a lot like memes, so I'm using it as an example there because they all like, look, minimum wage in Denmark. It's literally wrong. They don't technically have a legal minimum wage, but it is the lowest average wage, right? And it's considerably higher than 15 in our terms there. Right? Because the economy is better structured so that people simply get a higher wage for their time in. They work fewer hours and they make more money off of it. There's literally zero reason we couldn't do better than that because as a larger country, we have economies of scale and tons of things that give us structural advantages. It would be easier for us to provide a higher quality of life than it is for tiny countries like Denmark. Easier, not harder. And we simply choose not to do it.
Are you afraid of massive employment cuts when you raise the minimum wage to 15%? Because 85% of jobs come from small businesses. Mm-hmm. So are you afraid that, let's say AJ's Pizza across the street hires 3 people for $10 each. Mm-hmm. You raise it to 15, one person has to go. Mm-hmm.
So here's how this works. There are short-term and long-term factors there. In the long term, a higher wage overall, a higher minimum wage pushes all wages up. So everyone's wages climb up a little bit. So there's more wages. In the long run, that means more money is spent. If there's higher wages, more people can afford to buy pizza, the person will sell more pizza. And we've seen studies, not only in the US, but across the world here, when the wages go up, so does consumption, so does profit in businesses. But while some corporations can suffer like a little short-term issue there, a lot of mom and pops can't. So laws like that should actually be structured to compensate those small places based upon their profit margins. If whatever Bob's Pizza or something doesn't have the money to survive for a little while spending is increasing and they are going to get a short-term hit, they should be compensated for that so that they can keep that employment roll up. And then once the spending is higher, then everyone benefits and he will sell more pizzas. But it has to be thought of systemically, not just locally. This is one of the problems too with wages when they're on a local basis. If a particular city raises a minimum wage or a particular state raises a minimum wage, it actually does affect competitiveness. in areas that people do want to do business and they won't leave, like, I don't know, McDonald's had massive campaigns in like the Bay Area trying to say, you can't raise minimum wage, we'll have to fire everybody here, and I'll have to cut workers. They actually hired more workers because there were so many more people spending money. Because if you give poor people money, they spend it.
Right.
If you give rich people more money, you can't spend it fast enough, it just sits in a bank, it just goes to the Caymans or something. But if you give somebody who doesn't make a lot of money a little bit more money, they're gonna buy more pizza. And that's simply better for the economy as a whole. So the answer to the concern, because it is a real concern for a lot of small business, for mom and pops, not a dime should be given to McDonald's on things like this, but Bob's Pizza, you should watch their bottom line. If they can't afford to suffer those short-term losses, you protect that business, and then when the benefits kick in systemically, everyone improves.
Okay. I've never actually heard about that policy. So you're willing to subsidize small businesses
based on whatever their profit margin. Yeah, if they can't afford it, if they don't have the resources, if they've got tons of cash in the bank, whatever, if it's a successful small business, because there's let's face it, a lot of people take agricultural subsidies in this country that are multinational corporations. They don't need subsidies. I have no problem giving a small dairy farmer in northern New York a little bit of cash if he wants to stay in business and he's struggling a bit. But Tyson Chicken deserves not a single dime from me, right? So I would rather cut subsidies that are going off to profitable corporations and use that money to subsidize small businesses that are struggling to keep up with changes like that. It's money that's already exists in our economy. There's no reason to hand off money to fossil fuel companies or to giant agribusinesses or whatever here. Take that money, protect the mom and pops in the short run, raise the wages for the country as a whole, both through the short-term methods here of like minimum wage increases, but also change the tax code so it changes the incentives. Everyone's wages will go up. As wages go up, spending goes up. We have been a consumer economy since the 1920s. That's simply a fact. And I try to teach this using a term and a person people have heard of running classes. You guys know Henry Ford, right?
Yeah.
And what's Henry Ford super famous for?
Ford. Cars.
Well, cars, right? But like in terms of innovation, what new thing does he give us?
Yeah. I can't think
Yeah,
of
you're gesturing like an assembly line, right?
Yes.
Yeah, he's associated with the assembly line. But that's only part of it. He did increase the efficiency of production, right? He had a good use for interchangeable parts. Is an idea had been around for a long time by that point, but he sped up production there, which meant he lowered the cost of producing things. That's good. But the second half of it that everyone seems to forget is that he also increased the pay of his workers. Because his argument was, if I pay them enough money that they can buy my car, I will sell more cars. Right? And that's a simple piece of economic logic that too many people on the American right have forgotten. They seem to think that if you give more money to the rich, to the wealth creators and job creators, that they'll give us good jobs. That's just not how it's ever worked, ever. I mean, there's empirical data going back 2 centuries to show that does not work. But if you put more money in the hands of the workers, they spend that money, and that makes everyone richer. And Henry Ford got super rich by giving people more money, right? We had tons of millionaires in the 50s and 60s when wages were higher. There are still lots of people making tons of cash because the entire economy grew together. What we've instead done is we've allowed a small chunk of the population to get super rich and poverty to increase from everyone else. And why we are allowing, in the richest country in the world, poverty levels literally to increase, it blows my mind.
Yeah, so kind of going back to something we talked about earlier that you went over real quick, which is kind of along the same line, where you're taking an idea that's pretty highly supported by Democrats, but then you're bringing in the practical component of it that a lot of people don't think about.
Right.
It's like going back to what you said about forgiving student loan debt, and how even the people who say, I didn't go to college, it doesn't help me, my kids aren't going to college, it doesn't help them.
Yeah,
but you were saying it speeds up the economy and it will help them in the long run. That's something huge that I don't think a lot of people take into account when talking about the student loan crisis.
Right, and it affects a huge number of areas, which is why I'm arguing, and one of the reasons that I'm suggesting that as a candidate I can bring something interesting to this, because I can make economic arguments. I can take these policies and put them in slightly different terms and show them how they benefit people. And I think a lot of major politicians don't even do that well. I mean, Warren doesn't do that very well. Sanders does it better than some, which is why he had so much independent support, but even he fails in a lot of key areas. Like he doesn't really deal with, for example, automation very well, right? There are definitely areas to improve there. But if we can try to take a big issue, a big concern, we can show how does it affect my bottom line, how does it affect my life, how does it affect my kids, my family, and what's going to go on to me. If I can make it personal, then you can see the benefit of it. Right, which is again why I'm saying I'll go anywhere and talk to anybody about this. I'm literally I want to tell people in Republican chambers of commerce because the incumbent will go to them. He'll talk to them because and basically playing the whole. Democrats tend to see grounded Republicans on the economy, and the simple fact is on the economy they're empirically worse. Every single time you put Republicans in power, the economy worsens. It's just a fact. I mean, our national debt shot up. The deficit levels go up. In fact, the size of government even goes up, which is one of the things that blows my mind. But the marketing is brilliant, oftentimes for Republicans. Like, we're the small government people, so why do you keep making it bigger? Like, Reagan made government a hell of a lot bigger. And people just ignore the fact and listen to the slogan. I want to engage much more on the facts and on the substance. I want to actually say, look, this is what the data actually shows. This is how we can improve people's lives. Let's talk about that.
Yeah, that's super interesting. Kind of like what you were saying. That really is huge, I think, especially here in a Republican pocket of California, where you're able to do both. You're able to use these social ideas, but you're able to give it in a more practical sense, which a lot of Democrats don't do. They don't go into the economics of it. They don't go into the practicality of it and how it's going to affect you as an individual personally.
Right. Now, no offense at all to the previous candidate who ran the district, because realistically, she got a pretty good race for the area. All right, and she did raise a decent amount of money, and she knocked on a lot of doors, and she energized a lot of people, and I have a lot of respect for that. But while there's not a huge amount of difference in the kinds of policies we favor, there is a very big difference in the way we approach them.
Right.
So when you ask her about things like climate change or healthcare, she will tell you, we just have to do it, it's important, we'll find a way to pay for it. And I will tell you exactly how we can pay for it, and that paying for it will actually make you richer in the process. And I can show people how. So I can get past a lot of the objections to these things because I'm familiar with getting into the weeds in policy and trying to understand how it works. So if I can take that and simply deploy it practically, very pragmatically to someone, explain this is how it affects you, and that this doesn't, because a lot of times people will say oh, well, healthcare, all this is, it'll raise my taxes, I'll lose more money. You're thinking taxes, I'll have less money. Well, no, because just simply mathematics, it's basic arithmetic. You will have more money in your wallet at the end of this thing, not less, and I can show people how. And I think that gives like I said, it is an advantage in an area like this. It is actually purple, because you don't really win an area like this if you can't reach out to independents. I mean, yes, we can draw on new voters, disaffected voters, but a lot of people don't vote because they just don't care. They're not going to care. I want to try to give more people a reason to care. I want to draw more people in. I absolutely want to inspire more young people. But if we can also message things in a way that appeals to some of those cross voters, the people who don't really have a strong affiliation, or who may have, at least some overlap with you, if you can get them to say, yeah, this actually is better for me. I don't care who somebody voted for in the past. I mean, my view is, and people are going to know, I don't like Trump. Mm-hmm. I'm not going to hide that.
Right.
I like almost nothing about Trump. I mean, I actually didn't like the TPP, and he did kill that. So okay, there's one that I agree with them on the one issue that so I'm not a fan there. But I'm not going to walk around bashing all Trump voters. Because the simple fact is, some of them really are fine people. Right. Some of them are terrible people too, that's fine, but some of them are not. And attacking the voters is silly. Why would you do that? I mean, the voters are the voters. If you blame the voters, you've already lost the argument as far as I'm concerned. What you need to do is talk about the issues. Right? Somebody voted for such and such a person in the past, you want them to vote for such and such a person in the future. The way to do that is to make an argument that works. That's it. Right? Attacking such and such a person or attacking such and such a voter and name calling, that doesn't help. This person listened to that person, voted that way, give them a better argument.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Right, you see that in the polling data. Beto O'Rourke says if you vote for Trump, you're a racist, or Juan Castro is his name? Julian Castro. He says if you support Trump, you're supporting racism. So you do see that in the data. But we glanced over the economy. Me and you have gone back.
Well, just for a second, if I can. There is a way to make an argument like that, because if Trump is pushing a policy that does draw on that, right, and does have a racial component, then you are at least tolerating that. But that doesn't again mean the person is doing it for that reason or is themselves a racist. There is a kind of culpability there, but the problem with making those arguments is it's completely counterproductive, because you make someone defensive. I'm not racist, such and such, I have such and such friends, da, 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 and then you've just lost them. There's no way to talk about it. The position or the policy might be racist, but that doesn't mean you attack the people that way. It makes no logical sense to me. I would rather engage the people and try to help them to understand the problems with the policy and give them a better argument.
Okay. We'll get into the policy. As far as the economy, me and you have gone back and forth on whether the economy's good or bad. And you keep bringing up the real economy, because you take away the stock market, you take away the GDP growth, you take away wage growth. Is that
GDP growth, and not GDP growth or the wage growth. The employment numbers, I think, are mostly nonsense, because when you talk about job creation numbers, that's counting tons of jobs that don't really matter. It's counting the fact that people are taking multiple jobs. It's counting the fact that people are taking a part-time job that doesn't actually pay them a living wage. If I create a job that pays somebody minimum wage for 20 hours a week and give them that job, I have created a job that goes into the statistic for jobs created. It's still a crap job, and someone is still forced to work a crap job. This again gets back to, let's make it local. People in the inland part don't make a living wage, right? It's 40-some% of people easily do not make a living wage. By some calculations, it's actually in like 38, 39%, it's even lower than that, but it's still much less than half of people actually make enough money to survive even out here. And you know the cost of living is a little lower here than it is in, say, Orange County or LA. Right? We just don't pay people enough money. So saying, I created such and such a number of jobs doesn't tell me anything really useful on its own. What it does is it creates a smokescreen, right? And you can get a lot of the same things by pointing to the stock market. Because if you look back to the 1960s, 90% of transactions in the market were actually in the real economy, meaning they moved goods around, they were investing in businesses that produced something. I bought stock in General Electric. General Electric therefore built this new factory and employed these people. By buying a stock, it's an investment, right? And you were investing in something that actually employed people and did something. When you're investing speculatively on what something might be worth later, or on some cute new tech company or brand or logo or something, 90% of transactions today are pure speculation, which means they enrich the people who are investing. They're passing around paper money, but it has no impact on us at all. Most stock transactions don't actually affect us. That's what I mean by the real economy, like what produces things, what employs things, what's on the roads, what's all around us. I would like it if we as a society thought more in terms of making an investment that actually did something, rather than investing in a cute brand or something that I can speculate, oh, people are gonna like this super cool brand name.
So you disagree that the stock market is a tool to get out of poverty?
No, well, sort of. Investing in general can help anybody. The current stock market is again mostly crap though, because whenever people are jumping in and they're investing in the stock market now and investing in that speculation, yes, some people can do better with that, some people can climb up a little out of poverty out of that, but you can also fall much farther in debt with it, and you can also get a little bit ahead and then have nothing at all because of the fluctuations in it. The simple fact is, as long as it's basically vapor you're passing around, it doesn't have an effect overall. I would like to see more investment that actually had substance to it. Because that's, I lecture about this again. So you guys know I have to teach this kind of crap, right? So, and I'll give credit to any of the different ideas or systems that come up. I can be critical of absolutely every government and economic system ever, but I can also find some good things about it. And I try to show the values of it. When we created the idea of stocks in the first place, when joint stock companies were created in the 17th and 18th century, and were used to then limit some of the liability of investors and allow them to pool resources in order to invest in something. That was a brilliant vehicle to advance the economy. It powered the Dutch Golden Age. They could build massive merchant fleets that could sail all around the world because they could afford to do it. They did awful crap like the slave trade with it, but they did get rich, right? The basic mechanism actually makes sense. Markets do make sense and they can work. So investing in the stock market is a good way to get rich. Investing in a stock market that does not actually have a lot of economic substance to it overall, that does not actually produce something, doesn't make sense to me, because you can see a deterioration in the country as a whole, a reduction in the levels of investment, right? You look at huge companies now, your General Electrics now, their stock valuation is tiny, and yet they actually produce massive profits, employ huge numbers of people, they make tons of stuff, but we don't value that anymore. We value, I don't know, Google or whatever, we value the cute little tech companies, and that somehow means more. Google employs like a tiny fraction of what GE does, which means their overall economic impact on our lives can be lower. Google does do important things. Google should be worth something. Investing in Google is a good thing. Google should not dominate the markets. Does that make some sense as an idea? Yeah. I would prefer if more of our investments actually had a broader systemic impact.
So let's change gears. You're really passionate about healthcare.
I am.
Are you in favor of a single payer healthcare system?
I am, yeah. And again, just because it makes financial sense. The competition amongst tons of different plans massively increases the administrative costs for hospitals and providers, because every one of them has to employ a whole bunch more people to sit there and shuffle through paperwork. Does this plan cover this? Does this plan cover that? How much does it cover it for? What are the differences and how do we get it? Where's the co-pays, and work out all the different co-pays, and then all the people charging it and processing the transactions there. With a single payer system, you wipe that out. It's just not necessary, which means their operating costs go way down. When their operating costs go down, our costs for the services go down, which then lowers what you're spending. We spend twice as much as any other rich country on healthcare, and we do that because of the administration. So yeah, it simply makes sense. I'm not in favor of some kind of government takeover of the whole system. The NHS works brilliantly for the UK. It's fine. It's a great system. It's not what I'm in favor of the US. It doesn't fit the way we built up here. It's too late at this point to do something like that. I would not in any way be in favor of it. But the insurance industry, I don't see a benefit to us economically of having it. And I don't see that it actually adds any freedom to people to have those different policies, because let's face it, you don't care about your insurance policy, you care about the coverage and the provider. You want the doctor you like, you want the services that you like, you want to be covered for what's wrong with you, right?
Right.
Who's stamping the policy is irrelevant. That part I don't care. A single payer system is going to cover more, right? So it will provide more benefits to people, because you won't have someone with a profit motive weighing whether or not to do it. Because I don't know, this came up in the 2008 races there. Do you remember Sarah Palin's death panels? Mm-hmm. You're like, there'll be a bureaucrat to grandma's time to die, and let's face it, death panels already exist, but they're in corporate America. They already have actuaries in there determining, okay, how long you're gonna live, what it would cost to bother saving you. Okay, so they'll deny treatment for this or that. If you have a single payer system that's not profit driven, you don't have to worry about that at all anymore. It just disappears. And even though more is covered, the costs are still so much lower, because A, it's not fueling massive profit for shareholders. It just has to, make enough money to support itself. And, B, it lowers all of the other trickle-down costs through administration for everybody else, which means I want to empower small businesses, ordinary providers, hospitals, all the medical technologies that come out there, the producers, right, and the hospitals, everything would be cheaper for them, easier for them to run, and they could provide better service to us if they didn't have to deal with the insurance.
So you're not in favor of Nordic countries, their system?
It depends on which ones. There are a variety of different approaches to this. Some are hybrids where they use state insurers and private insurers. Some are entirely public insurers but entirely private provision. It really varies tremendously. The basic approaches, you can see tons of parallels there already. The simple fact is, while we can draw a lot of inspiration from the way different countries handle things, we still have to build something that works well for the United States. And in raw dollars, Medicare is an extremely efficient system as far as an insurance provider goes, right? As far as like, the elderly people who qualify for that, they have their Medicare card, they go to whatever hospital they want, they slap down their Medicare card and they're done, right? It's easy to do for anybody here. And the system on the back end is actually very efficient. So we have a system that already works. If we can cut out the wasted cash that gets poured into the private insurance sector, and simply provide that insurance to everybody else, your costs go down. So I think of it in basic arithmetic terms, because people talk about, oh, Medicare would cost so much money, right? Everyone's taxes would go up. Okay, so I sat down and I did the math for this, right? My taxes will go up by $1,200. That's a lot of money, $1,200. But I would save $9,000. At the end, after my $1,200, I would still have an extra $9,000 in the bank. That's my money. Right? If you get insurance from your employer, right? Your employer is paying for your insurance. Your employer is paying a lot more than you think for your insurance. If your employer is paying $17,000 for your insurance, right? But they have a small tax rise and you have a small tax rise, and they drop that $17,000 goes away, you just got a $10,000 raise. And it's your money because it's your hours, your productivity, it's part of your compensation package already. That's your money. And where's it going right now? It's going to bean counters. It's going to a wasteful, corrupt insurance industry that can afford massive lobbyist armies in DC to keep the system corrupt. The ACA added several nice things. Obamacare, right? The whole pre-existing conditions thing, that's nice. But it was basically a corporate giveaway. It was massively corrupt. It was, in many ways, not a huge improvement over the existing system because it left all the flawed components fully in place. It was basically written by corporate lobbyists. We need to take them out of the picture entirely. I don't want $10,000 of your money going to some bean counter then when it can be in your wallet and being spent by you at Bob's Pizza.
So you can put into policy, since they don't have to pay for since your employer doesn't have to pay for your insurance, they have to give you a raise?
They hired you, offering you a compensation package, right? Because employment is basically a kind of contract, right? You sit down and say, hey, would you take this compensation package? Yes, I will work for you, right? That insurance was part of that compensation package, which means it was offered to you. And I would make damn sure, if I was involved in writing that legislation, that it would include provisions to keep them from screwing you out of that, because they offered you that money. They were spending X amount of money when they hired you. That's the money they continue to spend. Because otherwise, again, it's a corporate giveaway. If that provision isn't in there, then they can just screw you out of that money and just keep the extra profit, and you've just got a tax rise for nothing. Which I would honestly be afraid someone is going to do. So I tend to watch for the small details like that, right? I would make sure that's written in there, right? And one of the reasons I try to make people aware of this, right? Because that is part of your compensation package. It's already your damned money, right? Which means if they no longer have to pay it off to some Blue Cross, whatever, some insurance company there, they got to give it to you, and you just got a raise.
Okay. So are you afraid of rationing? I know in Canada right now, rationing is a key topic in there.
No, because it's not really relevant. It wouldn't come into the system at all. Rationing shows up in systems like the Canadian healthcare system because it's not funded enough to deal with what they have. They also have a hybrid system with a ton of private provision as well as the public options there. So it has to deal with that. Right? There's less money simply in the system. This is one of the reasons that I favor, in economic terms, a single payer model. Right? You can leave all the provision of healthcare in private hands, but stop the bouncing around costs of dealing with the multiple insurers. Rationing shows up when there's just not enough in the system in the first place. There's not enough doctors or this or that. If you're lowering the costs, if I'm making it cheaper for a hospital to run, right? If I save them a ton of money, they can hire a new doctor. Then there's less rationing. You see how that works out for me mathematically? Right? If they have to pay 10 fewer administrators, they can hire another doctor or two. right? So the quality of care would simply go up because there's a lot more money. People wonder, how would we pay for Medicare? I keep trying to tell people, we're already paying for it twice, right? The money's already there.
Why do you think that we see a shortage of doctors in the single payer systems as in?
You don't in most of them.
In Denmark right now, there's a shortage of doctors. Canada, there's a little bit of shortage of doctors. I think they're estimating by 2030 there'll be 10,000.
Again, it varies from country to country, and those actually aren't because of single payer at all. One of the problems you have, and this comes up in a lot of like political discourse, is people can hit on small issues and they can say this is connected to that. Correlation does not equal causation, right? The fact that two things exist does not mean they are causally related in any way. One of the key issues run into shortages of doctors is, okay, let's take a local example. You know, here in the Empire, here in the 42nd, right? We could use a lot more physicians than we have. People often have a hard time getting an appointment out here, right? Why? People don't want to move here, right? It's, the standard of living might be a little lower. It's hard to attract doctors in. Okay, how about another one? You know that a lot of our physicians are born overseas, right? We have people from all over the world coming in. I mean, my partner lives in northern New York. A lot of physicians up there, like, they're from the Caribbean or this or that. They're from, further out to eastward. A lot of our physicians are coming in from Asia, right? We simply do not produce enough. We don't train enough physicians for the number of jobs. And why? Because our population is aging, right? You have a graying population that increases the number of providers that you need, right? B, the population is growing as a whole, right, through immigration and natural growth. So again, you need more physicians, right? And C, we do a ton of things to make people less healthy, right? Things like asthma are much higher than they used to be, right? Again, pollution. There's tons of things like that we do to ourselves, which means more times into the doctors, right? People have, bad diets. There's often lifestyle diseases that show up there. So you need more physicians. The shortage is from entirely unrelated issues. Right? Medical provision and education are two related areas that will always see increases in the cost to provide. The population keeps going up. If the population goes up, you need more teachers and you need more doctors. Period. That's just it. You're always going to have to spend more money on it. That doesn't mean the system is somehow broken.
So as far as doctors' pay goes, in those systems, they get paid 40% less.
Depends on that can vary a lot. I mean, physicians in the UK, even with their completely socialized system, make a lot of money.
Right. They make 114,000 average.
Yeah, but you see considerably higher salaries. I don't know if I wouldn't believe 114 average. I'd have to see that because I see physicians all the time, in $160,000, $200,000 listed there. People still make tons of cash.
They make a lot of bad
if you're factoring in everyone else, like nurse practitioners, everything else, to try and bring the averages down, they can come down that low. But physicians anywhere in the world make lots of money.
Right. So are you worried about de-incentivizing more people going into that field because they make less?
Why? Okay, so first off, is everyone going to something because they're trying to make money in the first place? No, I make considerably less money as an educator than I made before, right? B, you're still making a good wage. If you're making $200,000 a year versus like 50 or 60 for somebody else, you're being well compensated. And all of that still ultimately comes down to the market. If the provision of healthcare is private, which it would stay under Medicare system, then the pay of physicians is still private, right? How the hospitals run, it still is all part of that basic system, and they work out basic average cost for things, average wages, what you should be able to expect, right? That would still end up being the case. Given that we need to, I'm getting thirsty. Given that we need to attract more physicians in general, I can't see that going down. I can only see it going up. As it is, again, my partners are from northern New York, right? And it's an economically depressed area with a falling population. It's tons of small villages. I mean, you're only a few miles from Canada. I mean, there's not much up there, right? So they have a hard time attracting physicians. People don't want to live there. They would rather live in Boston or New York City, right? So you have to pay them a lot of money. The average wage there is tiny compared even to here because the cost of living is so much lower, but the physicians still make a lot of money. That's not going to change because you have to encourage people to do something. Expertise should always be paid for. you're never going to find a system that works, that pays everyone the same thing or drags everyone's wages down. People who have specialized jobs or specialized skills or expertise, they should be better compensated for that.
So, it's almost 12 o'clock, so we have to wrap it up a little bit short.
Okay.
And
I've been rambling for too long.
we didn't really get into a lot of topics that I really wanted to talk to you, but you're welcome to come again.
Oh, sure.
And we're going to give you just a time just to tell the voters out there in our 42nd district why you think you're the better candidate.
All right, well, the simple fact is, I'm in this race to help the people out in the district. I care about actual people and their concerns. I'm not in this to get rich for myself, right? I want to run to make you richer, right? I want to raise your standard of living. I want to raise your wages. I want to solve a lot of the basic systemic issues that we have in this country, and I want to change some of the national direction on big issues like clean elections and get people back to expecting responsive governance instead of just expecting generic politician A, right? We need to demand a bit more, and we need to be willing to work for that. So if anyone's interested in any of this, you can check out my website, liamomara.org, liamomara.org. This is the website there. There's all the social media stuff, so I'm on like Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, all that kind of business. I'm pretty easy to find there. And I'm all around the district too. So if you guys want to find me in a local area coffee shop, I'm always happy to chat about any kind of issues. If you've got a particular concern, there's like a little response page on the website, FAQs, contact forms. You can still jump on there, send me your question. I actually get those questions as an email, and I will respond to you. So if you're interested in this, please reach out to me.
And we'll put all of Liam's links down below. Thank you.